Okay, yeah, I just started
Ooh, I
recording.
just started. Okay. All right. We'll,
Okay,
we'll
good,
be in
good.
good sync, I think.
I think so too.
It's always good to be in
Um,
sync.
I'm always in sync with you, Eli. You and I, we have a lot of, I think it's good. How are you, man?
We have the wrong fit, but we have the right sync. And I'm doing okay. I am really just trying. I've been a weekend warrior, since the last time we recorded because I don't know. It's been pretty down. So the last time we recorded was Valentine's Day. That was our Valentine's Day, lovey-dovey episode of The Wrong
Right?
Fit.
The love episode. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, we talk about all of our our love episode stuff. I don't even whatever. Afterwards, that was kind of the last normal day before these Texas winter storms, which a lot of times we don't talk about like Texasy stuff. I feel like we don't talk about like our stuff because we wanted to be like you know anyone can listen to the podcast. But I think that this is such a big thing that no matter where you are in the United States, I'm sure you heard about if you're paying attention to the news, I'm sure you heard about the Texas winter storms or you got your own winter storm. But, for anyone who doesn't know, it got way worse in Texas and everyone lost their power and everything. Um, and that was kind of a low point because, I lost my power for a while. I know you lost your
Mm.
power very briefly, right, Marco?
Yeah, for what it's worth, I mean, down here in Laredo, I did not bear any of the brunt of any of this stuff that I know that my friends and acquaintances did up there in central North Texas. I mean, the horror stories of no power, no water, no internet, like that just did not happen where I was, which I'm very grateful for. And Eli's right. We only lost power for about an hour while I was asleep. So that was really not a big deal at all. Yeah, the intensity of it though was incredible and
Mm,
something that I
mm.
certainly had never seen before. And I remember when we recorded, there was a question of whether or not like you would have power or internet during that whole process. And luckily, we made it through the whole session unscathed. But I think later on in that day, you lost power. Am I remembering that correctly?
It was the next day I lost power.
Okay,
And
okay,
so I think I had this kind of like misplaced thought that we're gonna be fine. We're in Houston because I was in Houston, which isn't really. It's like more like coastal Texas, right? Like you go
right.
closer to the coast, you're more likely to have like slightly warmer temperatures, just because I don't know anything about meteorology. But we usually have it's slightly warmer than more central Texas. But we got it pretty bad at my place in Houston with my folks. Shout out 713. So yeah, we were in Houston and we lost power Monday. We got it back for about a couple hours on Wednesday, and then we had it gone until I think like Thursday morning or something like that. So we're talking about like a good like 3 day span of like on and off power, if that makes sense. So I think the total was probably closer to 2 days, just counting that period of time when the power was back on. But it was kind of like a 3 day ordeal of like we don't know if the power is going to be back on or not, and also part of that. Um, our water was we turned off our water because we didn't want pipes to burst, and then we opened the water up again and we found out pipe did burst. So
Oh wow,
even after
yeah.
that process we went from like having everything water, power, internet to like obviously when we lost power we lost internet. We still had our phones charged and stuff like that, but we were looking at about like a 3 day ordeal, and then after that ordeal we still didn't have water. Luckily I was able to shower at a friend's house on Thursday who did have water. And I made it my way back to Austin, after the whole ordeal was over, where we did have power and water and everything was fine. Which, I'm glad that I went to Houston to stay with my folks instead of staying in Austin because we found out then that Austin, we had lost power for, the better part of 4 days. Everything was worse than we thought it was going to be. So that was kind of like the lowest of the low points because I was like, we're talking about, I don't know who went to the same, education I had, but the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if you're familiar with that,
Right?
Marco. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
and I'm not super familiar with a different distinction, but basically it's just like a pyramid kind of showing you which needs are most important, which needs are more like basic, survival needs to like self actualization, like really becoming yourself, those kind of needs. And we were kind of in a place, and I think throughout this entire pandemic, this is kind of not to be too negative, but this entire pandemic has been kind of this, worrying about these like lower level needs of like these kind of survival needs of like, I don't want to get sick or get one of my, family members sick. We have like a duty to the community and whatever.
Right.
And we have a duty to ourselves to not, harm ourselves. But I think that really like that like worry about those basic level needs kind of hit like a high point of like worry when we, obviously we're still in the pandemic, but, I wasn't seeing anyone, during this period. So I wasn't worried about getting coronavirus because I was just staying with my folks. But like we were in this period where we didn't have water, power, food with this kind of pandemic kind of overarching thing kind of going on. And we were, we were just, it was just a very tough period. After that, I mentioned that I wasn't worried about getting coronavirus. I got sick the week after that. Sorry to rant about my, couple of weeks since we recorded. Maybe this is just kind of giving me my, like, this is to the wrong fit audience. This is kind of like what has been going on in this interim period. But we have this like last hump before, my spring break, which is finals, or like a midterms week. So it's kind of been like,
right.
Since 2/14 when we recorded, it's been like, a week and a half of winter storm stuff, a week and a half of being sick, and then this week, which is finals week. So that's kind of been, and it's kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel almost of like, I get a bit of a break after this occurrence, if that makes sense. So that's kind of like my trajectory right now. How you been doing, Marco?
Yeah. It really just hit me right now that the last time we recorded was on Valentine's Day because for that to have been like right before the week of extreme cold, because I remember thinking, that episode, that wasn't that long ago. We've kind of settled into this rhythm of every 2.5 weeks or so we put out a new episode. And that may slow down, that may rev up at any point. It just depends on timing, schedule, interest, and things like that. I think we have a pretty solid thing going right now. But either way, like the timing hasn't changed, yet it feels like a million years ago that like now that like you've phrased it that way, it's like, well, the cold thing feels like so long ago now because we've had like 2 or 3 weeks ish of straight like warm, hot weather.
It's a different world, literally just different.
Yeah. I mean, lovely weather, but it is such a interesting dichotomy there because you're right. I mean, even though my household, luckily, my neighborhood did not seem to be really affected by this. Other parts of Laredo definitely were. I remember driving through at night, just checking on my grandparents, making sure that they had, because they lost their power for a pretty long period of time, several evenings. So we were just checking in on them, bringing them ice and heat and things like that we could,
nice.
Right? Vast parts of the city were just in complete darkness. But then contrast that to, my neighborhood, my house, where there was power. It was nice. And, we went inside. And
living it up in the Hotel Marco.
I might as well have been in a completely different country, basically, because, huge swaths of the entire country of the U.S. were engulfed in cold. It felt like Texas was that national scandalous story because of, like, the power failures and just the failure in leadership. Not to get too political or anything, but I just think...
This is not a political podcast.
It is not a political podcast. However, that's the reason why, like you mentioned earlier, like even though, this was a thing that disproportionately affected Texans, like everyone knew about it because of the way it was covered and the way it was described nationwide by the media. I mean, this was like a day-to-day, like CNN story, the troubles with the electrical grid and internet service and water and utilities and things like that. I mean, that just didn't happen anywhere else, at least not to my knowledge. I know that there were articles that came out about how, like, look, like Oklahoma and like Minnesota, like they are all fine because they're prepared for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was, the national story was that we were not prepared for it.
Even to take a step back from that, even obviously there's like political things going on, like money, blah, blah, blah. But like, just to take a step back from it, I think it is like that general thing of like, we just aren't prepared for this kind of weather here, because like,
right.
It just doesn't happen here like that often. And, I've heard like, maybe like 10 years ago, there was like some freeze. And like, I know in the 80s, my mom was telling me about like, there was a big freeze then and everyone was like, oh my God, we're going to lose power. And it ended up being like a bad thing, but not this kind of a bad thing, not to get too kind of like you were talking about the passage of time and not really comprehending, or just like, it's just crazy. Like, this has only been 3 weeks since we recorded, basically. And it's been 3 weeks since these winter storms first started. And I forget how that even happened. Just looking outside, going outside, it's like 70 degrees out in Austin. It's perfect weather.
Right.
But the one thing that like reminds me is I go out and then I see like half the plants on, that I see on the streets are like on the sidewalks or whatever. Half those plants are just dead. Like, ferns died. Like a bunch of plants just
it's unbelievable.
It's crazy to see. It's all these, because people have like, cacti in their yards, and they're just dead cacti, because you can't survive if you're cactus used to the desert. You can't survive sub-zero or sub freezing temperatures for extended period of time, like temperatures in the teens. And also another thing, I took a friend to get his vaccine yesterday because he didn't have a car, and he was like going, like he told me, I took pictures of him getting his vaccine, just so like, hey, it's like a memorable thing, like like you got your vaccine, like you're safe-ish now, whatever. Right. It was a big moment, and I took pictures, and he was going through, I sent him the picture, and he was going through his camera roll, and he was like, man, I've taken 2 pictures since like February 18th, which is basically when the freeze happened, and everyone took a bunch of freeze pictures. He said, I've taken 2 pictures since February 18th. And that just kind of shows, like, it does feel like time has just kind of stopped in those 3 weeks, at least for me. And like, being sick didn't help with that either. But yeah, it just feels like nothing has happened since the freeze. And at the same time, it's been such a long time since the freeze occurred.
It's interesting now to look back on it and think, I remember looking ahead to that week of cold, because it had been forecasted for a while. And I remember looking at it, I was like, wow, like this is great. Like this is the last cold. This is probably going to be the last consistently cold week of this winter. Because Texas winters tend to be quite mild, and they end pretty early. So, we were about to head into March, and especially down here, down south, like in Laredo, they definitely end like late February, early March, which is where we are right now. Yeah. So I was like, great, last week of cold. And in Laredo, it wasn't as cold, although it was still pretty cold. It wasn't
Laredo,
as cold
like,
as...
a little clarifying.
It was like we had day to day like lows in the 20s and like highs in the 30s, like but I think our lowest temperature was like 19, 21 or something like that. I know in Austin it got to like 0. All of this is in Fahrenheit, by the way, the superior temperature descriptor. If you like Celsius, stop listening, because I don't respect you.
Dude, what about our audience, the one listener that's in
the Brussels
Brussels
listenership? I'm sorry. And again, like, and then I never thought, looking at that week ahead, that it would turn into something like this, because I was fantasizing. I was like, man, like if this wasn't like if we weren't in like pandemic season right now, like this would be like a really great week to like be in Austin with my friends and like going out to eat and like going to parties and planning stuff and like doing like going shopping or whatever. Like I love that weather for those kinds of activities. Like that's why like winter is always fun. Like I love, like this is a little bit further back, but like the holiday season is always fun when it's cold and you're doing all those activities. And even like now, after like the new year and everything, like it's still a good time to do all those things, especially when the weather is cold. Because like I love cold weather, I love cold like clothing and things like that. And
you do be liking your cold clothing.
I do. I dress.
Marco.
My wardrobe implies that I live in a much colder climate than I actually do. My summer wardrobe is just like lacking. And we might talk about that a little later, actually, with one of these topics. It might come up.
All right.
But it's, yeah, I mean, but again, like, I never would have thought, because then like those estimates actually got revised down.
Way worse, yeah.
As the days went on, and they were like, okay, actually, this day where we thought the high was going to be 45, it's actually going to be 31. And like, okay, it's a lot colder than you anticipated. So yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. Like now that we're so far removed from it, and like there have been days where I've been positively like sweating out here, and getting used to the heat again. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. And like I said, like those plants are at this point the only reminder, it feels like, looking outside, that this thing happened. Like, these plants, just dead plants everywhere. And besides that, it's just like nothing ever happened. And, which sucks that the one reminder of our little, horrible kind of winter storm situation, blizzard situation in Texas is just a bunch of dead plants. But, it could be a lot worse. And I know for some people, it is a lot worse. I know even last week, hearing about some people still didn't have their power up, like tons of people not having water up. It's just a nightmare. And for my, family, we didn't get our water up, I think, until last week because we a pipe burst and we couldn't turn our water back on because there was a leak. And we just kind of had to, not have water for a week and wait for a plumber. But we got it all fixed. And I know there's tons of people out there, apartments flooded, people's houses flooded, really bad stuff. And I think we were lucky enough not to hit the real brunt of that bad stuff. But
you were talking about like reminders and everything. Like, what was this reminder? Like, you look at the dead plants, it reminds you of the cold. I have been finding lately, like, going outside and feeling these like kind of temperate, kind of warm days that are not like in the 90s or anything, but they're like 81, 75. There might be like a gentle cool breeze, like these beautiful spring days, right? That we don't get a ton of before the heat starts getting really intense, but we do get them a little bit.
Yeah.
I can't help but feel like, wow, this is exactly what Austin feels like during this time of year. And what was this time of year? Last year? The start of the pandemic.
Pandemic apocalypse is what I'm going to call it.
And we have here, and you're talking about spring break and all of this stuff. It's like, we are about a week or so removed from like the start of the real COVID-19 pandemic here in the United States. And like, that is like a topic filled with like a lot, like we could dive into that a lot. I don't want to go too deep into it because it's kind of depressing. But
I like what the little emoji. So on our topic sheet, like I put this on there. I put a little, message. Like, let's not get too depressing. Let's kind of keep it chill. And Marco had this fun little emoji with a crying face, and I think that's how a lot of us feel looking back on kind of that time. I think not great memories. It was definitely a difficult like transition, and it is weird like looking back at I think that the real like the plants are to the winter storm as like Snapchat memories are to the start of the pandemic, I think, because I've been getting a bunch of like a year ago you were at like this party or this like
rally. Don't tell me that you and I are thinking about the same party that you and I were both at around a year ago this time. We're thinking about the exact same party, right?
We are thinking about the exact same party. The end, what we didn't know was like the end of the world party, basically.
Yeah. Unbelievable. That was a great party, by the way.
That was a fun party, and it was the last hurrah, and like just thinking about all that, and I was thinking about not going that day because I was just like, it'd been a long week. I had like midterms were about to pop up because it was going to be the last week before spring break. But I was like, I'm going to go out, and God, I'm so thankful that I did because that's the last time I saw so many people in person, and like the last time that I was able to have any sort of like party kind of atmosphere, fun time like type thing. Because afterwards it was just like, okay, state of Texas is kind of shut down. A bunch of things are unsafe. Go home from school, and just this whole like nightmare scenario just crept up. And I was thinking yesterday of just like, I have this like weird, like irrational fear of like spring break now, which is like, I'm a senior, so this is going to be like maybe my last spring break, but I have this like weird irrational fear of like going on spring break now of like something really horrible is going to happen. And like, I don't know where these thoughts are coming from, but it's like I said, irrational thought of like spring break equals like the end of the world for some reason,
Certainly it's just going to remind me of like the early days of the pandemic. I mean, again, like the weather is just, the weather right now is lovely. I mean, it's nice. It's like, I've been going on more like outdoor bike rides with my dad lately. And like nice. The weather has just been lovely. Like I love like the warm embrace, but it's not hot. You don't sweat a ton.
Yeah.
And it's like windy and it's fun. You see people out there. like in playgrounds and playing basketball and whatnot. And but again, like it's just like, well, that's how this all start. Like it started with nice weather and beautiful everything. And, like it was springtime, and you're right. Like it does like trigger these memories in your head about life before and life at the start.
Yeah.
And now we're about to be a year removed from it, and like what really has changed? Like, how have you changed? What the good, the bad, and you've got like, and it's great. Like you mentioned it this way, like this is your last spring break, and I mean, I was a second semester senior in college when this all started, so like I did not have to make like the difficult decisions that students had to make like when the new school year started and everything. Like I was very blessed in that regard, that I didn't have to decide whether or not to go to Austin again or anything, because I don't know what I would have done. And we kind of talk about that a little bit, actually, in episode 2.
Yeah.
If you want to go back and listen to that, we talk about that a lot. So, yeah, I feel for you. This is your second spring break completely ruined, because if you're playing it safe, like if you're still playing it safe, like we really recommend that you should.
Yes.
There's a lot that you didn't do last year that you still shouldn't do this year.
Exactly.
We know that like vaccines are rolling out, and you know they're issuing some guidance on like what can a group of vaccinated adults do, and it's very encouraging. It's very optimistic. It's very hopeful. So the sooner that more kids and friends our age get vaccinated, a big well of activities really open up, to make it kind of to hopefully make life feel back to normal. But it's just like, again, like it's so hard to wrap your head around, because I can still recall like individual moments from the early pandemic and the mid pandemic and like summer, like last summer, and it feels like not too long ago, but it also feels like a million years ago.
Yeah. I think that, like you said, I can kind of like pick out some individual events and memories from, the summer and then the spring before that, like that COVID kind of season before that. But really, it is a little difficult to pick out. Like it feels like a lot of that time is just like a mush. Like I don't remember. Like I remember some individual instances, but I don't really remember that time period of, before summer, after spring break, last year, where we were just at the beginning of the quarantine and, not really leaving my house at all for anything, not really going to the store for much of anything, like kind of worried, like what's open, what's closed, just everything is just, up in the air, worried about, dumb things like toilet paper. And, I think that from that, I think that everyone I know has grown up a lot since that time, because I think we were faced with, everyone I know that I still talk to has grown up a lot since that time, because I think we were all faced with a lot of like kind of adult decisions about the safety, our safety, and the safety of our friends, and just a lot of adult decisions that we had to kind of make for ourselves. Unfortunately, like we were sent home to our parents. Most of us college students, a lot of people I know, were sent home to live with our parents. And, in that sense, that kind of, looks on the outside, kind of looks like a regression of like, going back to when you were younger. But I think that, we're still adults, even if we did go to living back with our parents, and we still had to like make responsible decisions of our own. And it's just, I think that a lot of people grew up and like started understanding like the value of like our personal safety and respecting the value of our personal space safety in a way that we hadn't before. We were just kind of cavalier, young people maybe, thinking we're invincible and all that. But, I think maybe I'm just imparting that onto just a whole host of people that maybe that's not the journey they had. But I feel like that's kind of the journey that I had, just being faced with these really tough decisions. And, I think I hopefully, I never got COVID. I never transmitted it to anyone else. So I think I made like the right adult decisions. And I would, also I was able to maintain, my mental health, which is another important factor through this. But I think I'm proud of the decisions I made. It just was a lot of like very difficult journey, if that makes sense. And I think we're still in that journey of making difficult decisions. And it's, in some ways it's harder now than it was then, because I don't know, like everyone taking this differently, but I know for sure spring into summer was the period where I was kind of like, okay, I'm not seeing really anyone. I think in the summer I started seeing people, but we always met outside. And I think now we're kind of at a different point, and the line has somewhat shifted a bit of like what we're seeing, because now I am seeing some like one or two friends, and like I'm having them over and stuff, and that's even more tempting, is that COVID numbers, seeing them go down, seeing some fatalities especially go down, that makes it that much more tempting to like break your kind of what you've got going on. And I think that's just like, we're not out of the woods yet, and just kind of making sure to not break those things, especially when you've got, again, not to get too political here, but like some of our leaders saying, this is over. So it's just a lot of cross messaging, and there's a lot of temptation. But, I think that through this kind of, maybe I wouldn't have made this decision a year ago, but through this like maturation of the last year, I think I'm coming to a place where I'm making like more just informed and like mature decisions about things like public health and stuff like that. I don't know if that's a journey that like you went through, or just a journey that I went through. But
well, remember what the Bible tells us about temptation, Eli. To resist it.
To resist that. Resist that. That's what Moses said.
He did. He said, "Thou shalt not have raucous, unsafe house parties." That's what he said. That's actually exactly the 11th commandment, but it was
it's chiseled into the rock.
Not to get too religious on this podcast. This is not a religious podcast.
Not a religious podcast.
Yeah,
that would be very difficult for someone to construe this as a religious podcast, because there would be a lot of layers. Like, is this a parable? Like, I don't know. I can't answer that.
So I definitely think the events of early on, well, actually, just this whole year, the events and the decisions we've had to make, and the things that we've had to recontextualize, I think that has completely like wiped away a lot of like naivete that I think we all had just about life and our risk taking, the things we took for granted. It's actually, the more I think about it, like the more I think like it's actually kind of incredible, like how lucky, I think we stopped taking for granted like how robust like our immune systems are, because like I can tell you that like there are things that I do now that I would have never done before, in terms of like safety, like health safety, right? So like keeping my hand, as dumb as this sounds, like keeping my hands to myself and like not, and like taking really good care to not touch my face and my eyes and everything, like that's a very like early thing from like those early days. But like I still think about it, because I think like, how many times do I touch things and touch my face? Like how many times do I like touch the bottom of my shoes and then like not care at all about washing my hands? Like maybe I'm just really disgusting, and maybe people were doing that before and I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I'll tell you that like that's like a different thing from my life, right? Like before then, like I never thought about that, and now I think about it constantly. Like how many times were we close to groups of people, like sweaty meat bags, like exhaling germs and bacteria and maybe parasites and other things. Like we just like, we would just do that, and then we would go home and just like go to sleep, and then like never think about it ever again, and it's crazy. Like again, like there's a good and bad to that, where it's like, well, actually then that means that like our immune systems are quite robust, and they handle a lot of these external threats that we faced for years and years and years without ever worrying about it, right? But on the other hand, like now with a virus that is very easily transmitted, like we can't take for granted that anymore, and we can't like, we have to like think about our interactions in a much different way. And like I don't know how, when like normal comes back, quote unquote, if that ever comes back, I don't know how it's going to end up changing my relationship with other people, with like large social events and everything. Like I'm definitely going to be more cautious. I'm definitely going to like one thing's for sure, if I ever fly again, which I probably will, but if I fly again, like I'm definitely wearing a mask on like all airplanes now. Even if COVID is completely wiped out, like just like the horror stories I've heard about airplanes and like how poor the circulation really is, it's like, wow, like I never thought about it. It's like, what a surprise that we don't all get like tuberculosis when we're on airplanes, like it's actually unbelievable how poor like ventilation is on airplanes and in like most buildings in the world.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. This will definitely break your rule of not getting too depressing, but I will just quickly mention that like all year in this past year, all I have thought about is like the futility of our societal structure, of like what even is the point of having like an economy like this or a social structure like this if like a pandemic like can just like upend all of it, and we act as if pandemics can't happen, and yet like when it happens, like now suddenly we can't do anything. Like, does that make sense? Like like again, like when you grow up like in American media and everything, like adulthood is like hanging out with your friends and having house parties and going to bars and going to clubs and having fun and going to work and punching the clock and
like
having
living the Friends life, living the How I Met Your Mother life.
Exactly. And that doesn't appeal to everybody, but I think it kind of appeals. I think parts of it appeal to most people, right? So, but then the pandemic can just put a stop to all of that, and it really makes you question the validity of our social system. And if we go down this rabbit hole, it's going to get very depressing. So I just want to introduce that. But like that's like that's a thing that I have been grappling with like for months and months and months, and I don't have an answer to any of it. I just kind of keep it out of my mind, and replace those thoughts with happier thoughts. But sometimes that's the best you can do.
We do be living in a society, that's for sure.
I put on our topic sheet a topic. It's my topic number 2. And it says, don't look at this before recording. And I don't know if you look at the links or anything that I put in there before we start.
I usually do.
Yeah, they're just there so you can brief yourself, get filled in on any topic that I might want to talk about. But this, I definitely wanted you to get. I wanted to get your reaction, and I wanted you to describe it to the audience. So don't click it just yet.
I'm like fingers on the trigger, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'll be able to in a second. I just want to, I want you to just look at it. Give me just look at it, take it in, right? There's no like tricky, hidden message or anything. Like it's just look at it. Try not to look at the Facebook comments. They'll probably pop up on the side there. They're going to kind of give it away. So don't look at that. Just look at the image and describe it for the audience. Right? Go ahead.
Raw. Okay, I can click on the link. Just raw reaction. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Just take it in for a second and then describe it to the audience. And don't look at the sidebar. Don't look at the comments. Like, try not to look at any of that. Okay. Just the image.
So it's a F1 racer, right? Like spose a wheel. I've learned my lesson a bit about.
Thank you.
Racing.
Yes.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I think it looks cool. I like the colors. Haas, I like that. That's kind of a cool name. I don't know if that's the name of a company or a name of just a specific racer.
Right.
I don't know the design of F1 racers too much. I'm kind of confused at where. So obviously, I can see the back is the back, the front is the front. From my perspective, and I'm sure we'll link this image. From my perspective, the left side's the back. The right side's in the front.
That's correct.
And the driver looks like there's like the cockpit type thing. I don't know if that's the right verbiage, but here we are. Kind of in the middle there where it kind of like the white part dips down. Is that where the driver would go?
Yeah, so that's actually that's called the halo, that little like instrument or that like protrusion. That's called the halo. It didn't used to be there. If you look at like older pictures of Formula One cars, they would just be complete open cockpit, and they are still open cockpit. There's not like glass or anything there.
Okay.
But the halo is there was instituted a couple years ago, and it's there to prevent like flying tires or barricades or flying F1 cars from like hitting the driver's helmet and like decapitating him, ending his life. Therefore,
probably a good call. And I don't want to know about any stories where this became an issue.
The Halo has already saved lives, so it's since its implementation, and that's actually another interesting story we could talk about at a future point. Right. But that's actually not. I love that you're describing it, and I love that you're giving me all these details. But I definitely wanted to get your description of the of the design of this car.
The
like,
colors?
what is the colors and everything. What is immediately jumping out to you?
So definitely. So I'm looking at the detailing, and I see there's this little German flag. I'm seeing there's the U.S. flag kind of on the underbelly, but kind of the design and Ural. So Ural is like Ural Mountains, and that's like Russia, right?
Yes,
Is that right?
That is.
Ural
Yeah,
Mountains?
you're getting in the right direction. Yeah,
And that's the Russian flag, I think.
Right.
I'm confused with the. Like, I don't know which the right coloring. Like organ, like what it's like. I know it's red, white, and blue are the colors. I don't know if that's the right order of it. I know it's obviously not France, and I know it's like I can't think of what country it is, but it looks like the right order of the Russian flag. Again, don't know it off the top of my head. Is this so? Haas sounds German, and the design, like I said, like Russian flag, and I see that the little German flag by the cockpit, and it says a German-looking name, Schumacher. Yeah. So that's curious to me. Is this design? So is it designed by a German engineering for a German? Is this designed by Russian engineering for a German race?
Yeah.
Racer?
So let's clear it up for you. And this, I wanted to get your cold take on it, just because I wanted you to get like this idea of like the confusion here, right? That you have, and part of it is based on like you don't know this team, like you don't know like the design, like you don't know like why these designs would be here.
Yeah.
But part of your confusion is going to come up, and I think is going to transition us to like I think the main topic here. So of course this image will be linked in the show notes, and I'll describe it thusly, right? So Haas is an American team. This is Haas F1 Team. They are the newest team in Formula One. They came in 2016 as like a big, like we're an all-American team, right? Of course, it's not all American. The owner is American. The team is based in North Carolina, but a lot of like the infrastructure, the engineers, and certainly the drivers, they're overwhelmingly European, because Formula One is broadly European sport, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to get American F1 drivers because there just aren't that many that are of the F1 caliber, and there's not a lot of like incentive to get like NASCAR drivers or IndyCar drivers because the skill sets are required are quite different. So it's hard to get American F1 drivers, but Haas has like staked its reputation and its brand identity around America, which is why you see like it's quite small now, but the American flag used to be a much bigger part of the Haas brand identity. You can barely see it.
The bottom underneath the S on the Haas logo. You can barely see it there.
The German flag you mentioned is actually that's for the driver. So this car would belong to actually a brand new rookie, Mick Schumacher, who's German. He's racing for Haas this year. Mick's got his own very interesting story that I think we'll get on a tangent if I get into that. So that's what the German flag is for. Very often on cars of all teams, all nationalities, like you will see like the driver's name and sometimes their national flag, right? So the German flag is there for the driver. Normal, right?
So right now we're working with it's an American team,
German driver.
Got it.
And so the big piece that we're missing here is this huge Russian motif that is running through this car.
Yeah.
And you mentioned another big name other than Haas that is like printed on this car is Uralkali, and you are absolutely right. Ural of the Ural Mountains, right? And this is a Russian chemical fertilizer company.
Huh. And like this is just in the same way that like Coca-Cola would put their name on a car. Like this is just
right. Okay. So like if Coca-Cola wanted to pay for a car and like be a huge title sponsor for Red Bull, right? Let's say Coca-Cola Red Bull Racing. Yeah. It would, you would have some Red Bull logos. It would probably say Red Bull there to show you what the name of the team is, but like a lot of it would be red, and you'd see some white streaks and Coca-Cola, right? Like Uralkali is for this season the title sponsor of Haas. So what that means is it's like if you say Haas, like the team itself is going to refer to itself as Uralkali Haas F1 Team.
So it's our identity now. Like it's like they've sponsored,
right.
In the same way, it's like Red Bull is like a team like in the MLS kind of thing. Like it's like
exactly like what are they called? Is it called the Red Bull something? It's like the New York Red Bulls or something.
Yeah, it's like the New York MLS team. I don't really follow the MLS, but I know it's like
right.
That's their team name.
By that same token, like Red Bull used to be sponsored by Infinity, so it was Infinity Red Bull Racing, and then they became sponsored by Aston Martin, so then it was Aston Martin Red Bull Racing. So this is the same kind of thing. It's Uralkali Haas F1 Team. You might be wondering, okay, well, what's the point of me showing you any of this? Well, it is like overwhelming Russian branding on an American Formula One team. And this has caused quite a deal of controversy in the Formula One world, particularly with American Formula One fans. So if you want to gaze your eyes to the right and look at some of these Facebook comments, they are quite negative, right?
Yeah, lots of. I gotta love the Facebook discourse. You know,
it's the worst.
I'm seeing the top 6 of 474 comments, and all of them I think are about the American flag, the Russian flag, like people just getting mad at the different things. I see one is the shortest top comment. I think it's the third comment from the top. All Russian fans are proud of Haas F1 Team.
Right.
And yeah, it's. I think this is the one with the. Let's see. I think it's the one with the most. The comment with the most reactions is TBH. I actually find it ironic that an F1 team racing under the U.S. flag is using a car with the Russian flag on it, since the U.S. always portrays Russia as the enemy in movies and video games. That's pretty funny. But most of them are angry comments is overwhelmingly what I'm seeing here.
Right. So there is this is a kind of a multifaceted controversy, and I actually don't want the scope of our conversation here to actually be mainly an F1, which is why on the topic sheet, like underneath it, I wrote international politics and sport. You watch a lot of basketball, and I know that geopolitics has entered itself in basketball many, many times.
In a big way, yeah, especially recently.
So we can transition from that to there. But first, I do want to explain a little bit more about this Formula One thing. So Formula One has always been an international sport with lots of like shady international sponsors and international intrigue. Like there's actually like a big brouhaha right now about Formula One potentially racing in Saudi Arabia this season. It's a big deal. It's a really big controversy. And it's hardly the first time F1 has gotten flack for where they're racing in. I mean, we're racing in Bahrain, which has got like human rights abuses. They've raced in China and lots of things. So this is hardly the first scrap with international intrigue. But what's going on here is that Haas have really been struggling for the past few years. They were actually considered possibly the 4th or 5th best team in the sport at one time, which is quite a good thing because when you're 4th best, the only people ahead of you are the big 3 teams, which are Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. So like to be among that company, like that's a good company to keep. But for the past 2 seasons, Haas have been languishing pretty much at the very back of the grid, scoring very few points race to race, which is not good because Formula One is a very expensive sport, and if you're not, if you're not getting points, if you're not competing with the big boys, then you start to lose that incentive to actually run the team. That's a big problem for Formula One because if Haas were to leave, then that would leave there to be 9 teams, which usually the happy minimum is around 10 teams. So it's a big lot. So there's a lot of like, is Haas going to go under? Is Gene Haas going to keep? That's the team owner. Is he going to keep funding the team out of his pocket? Blah blah blah. Right? Like that's a lot of intrigue around that. So a big thing in Formula One, and I this is probably something similar that happens in other sports too, is to sign what is known as a pay driver. Right? It's kind of a derogatory term for a driver that has some skill. You have to be skilled to make it to Formula One, but the biggest draw is the sponsorship that they bring, right? So you see here the car that I'm showing you the image of, this is Mick Schumacher's car, who's kind of like a very well-respected rookie who's coming in, but his teammate is a Russian guy named Nikita Mazepin, who has been broiled in his own controversies around his comments, his track demeanor, his racing style. He's a quick guy, but he has a lot of controversy behind him. And one of the notes of controversy is his overwhelming sponsorship from, this big Russian chemical company, which, as you might imagine, also has its own history of dark controversies and things like that. I mean, come on, it's a Russian chemical company.
Yeah, Russian chemical company sounds like the bad guy in a Bond movie.
Yeah. Exactly. So Haas are on hard times, and Urwal Kali is well poised to pay a lot of money to get Mazepin in, right, and driving for the team. So people don't want Haas to leave. They don't want there to be only 9 teams in Formula One, but in order for that to keep happening, Haas need to take this money, right? Another, if you can believe it, another added layer of complexity to this is the fact that the World Anti-Doping Agency, in accordance with the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS is what it's called, they have just recently, in the past 2 months, come out with a ruling banning the use of the Russian anthem, Russian flags, and even mentions of Russia in international sport, and that affects Formula One. So what that means is that, Russian drivers and athletes can compete, but they have to compete under neutral flags.
Yeah, because Russian athletes aren't,
right.
You're not doping in Formula One, I don't think.
Well, I mean, you could. I don't know what lot of benefit you could eke out. I mean, this is a very physical sport. I mean, driving those cars for 70 laps is very tough work.
Of course, yeah.
I don't know if doping, I don't know how much benefit you would get from doping, though, but, it's conceivable. That's not really the point here. It's more just like this is a ruling. So we already knew that Mazepin was going to race under a neutral flag, but this car, very outwardly showing Russian flag motifs, has become a little bit of a controversy because we actually don't know how it's going to turn out. If Haas can keep racing, we'll be able to race with this color set, with this livery. That's what they call car designs. They call them liveries. So
yeah, it is kind of hilarious to see, because I didn't know this whole controversy about Russian. I don't follow a lot of international sports, but it's interesting to see. The Russian flag is that little German flag. You can't, I'm sure when this Russian driver takes his car, he's going to have the neutral flag there instead of the Russian flag. So you can't put a Russian flag in that little space right there. But instead of putting in that little space right there, you put it all over the entire car. That is, I don't know if ironic's the right word, but that's just a lot.
Yeah, that has already caught the attention of the World Anti-Doping Agency, and they are investigating to see whether or not this is something that's going to keep going forward. So this is still a developing controversy, but I wanted to bring it up because it has so many layers of intrigue and controversy and everything. I thought it would be interesting to talk about here on the show. And like I said, international politics is no stranger to pretty much all sports, including the sports that you like to follow. So I kind of want to just get your thoughts on that, and maybe you can bring in some stories that you would know that I wouldn't know, and keep this going.
The thing that this most reminds me of, and especially with the Russian involvement, obviously the Olympics, that huge doping scandal thing, but really I remember with FIFA, I've watched a few videos. I don't follow FIFA all the time. I know that that was such a crazy controversy with all these, the way that, FIFA is making these deals behind closed doors about where they're going to put the games and stuff like that. And how they were paid off by these, Russia was found to be guilty in some sort of way, with kind of just, lobbying the FIFA committee and all that. And of the international sports, of the sports I follow, mostly it's national. It's not international sports. I don't really follow FIFA that much. But I follow baseball, and I follow baseball a bit, and I follow basketball mostly. And basketball, you think it's a national basketball association. It's not international FIFA. It's not F1. It's just across the nation. I guess Canada is a team. Toronto Raptors are a team. They have that one. So basically, at any event, any sporting event, it's just we'll play the American anthem, and then we'll throw in if we're playing Toronto, we'll throw in the Canadian anthem. I remember at the All-Star
Right.
game where, representatives from every team are playing. They always throw in the Canadian national anthem. Just
So the Canadian anthem, that's 0 to 100 by Drake, right?
That's exactly the anthem. Yeah,
Okay,
they just
thank you.
play
I just
it.
wanted
Drake has to
I
be
just wanted
there.
to be sure about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, that's "Money in the Grave" by Drake, right? Featuring Rick Ross. That's the Canadian anthem.
After the 2019, which is that's when that's when he wrote the song, right? Was after
I do, of course, yes, of course.
It's on the cover.
Come on, man,
yeah.
come on, son. Okay.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of Canadian history right there. But it is interesting that there's not. You think that there wouldn't be as much international controversy for this very national sport. Like I said, there's a Toronto team. There used to be a Vancouver team, but besides that, it's all United States. And there's been talk about expanding. There was even talk about expanding it across before the pandemic. Obviously, there was talk about expanding it to Europe. Actually, like having a team in Great Britain, which would have been,
that'd be awesome.
It would be awesome, but it also would have been insane because you have 82 basketball games a year, and you're talking about every team has to make a flight to Britain for at least a couple games, and that's just a crazy schedule, and scheduling games. It's a whole thing in itself.
It's already hard enough to do in this huge country. The U.S. is massive. It's already hard enough.
Yeah, there's a whole controversy about they want to get rid of the East-West division, and there's a lot of people who want to get rid of that East-West playoff divisioning in basketball because the East is the much worse conference than the West right now, and so you've got a lot of bad Eastern Conference teams making in the playoffs when good Western Conference teams aren't. But the biggest objection to that has been geography and people saying that you can't do that because we want to make sure that all of the games are on the same scheduling for Western Conference teams, and that's a whole, you don't want an East Coast team playing at a time, and that's a whole thing for that. But you throw in several more time zones when you're getting into the GMT, from going from Pacific to the GMT, that's a big shift. But anyway, you'd think that this very national sport would not have a lot of international controversy, but obviously a couple of years ago, and I'm sure you've heard a bit about this, and I'm not super well versed in the controversy myself, but I have kind of a basic understanding of it, being from Houston, which was kind of the epicenter in the basketball world of this controversy with China.
That's right.
So since Yao Ming, just to give a very brief history lesson, since Yao Ming was drafted, I think in 2001, by the Houston Rockets, he was the first draft pick of his draft, I believe. Big deal, huge 7-foot guy, makes guys like Shaquille O'Neal look small in comparison to him. Since that huge and it was a huge thing that he was drafted because he's obviously a Chinese athlete. We allowed him. He plays for China. He played for China internationally. China is I don't know exactly how it worked, but they were allowing him special permission to play NBA basketball. And it was a whole controversy because they're talking about he was basically kind of bred to play basketball, which is controversial in itself. He was meant to be who he was made to be, which was an NBA star. But anyway, ever since he was drafted by Houston, and I think that this is not just because of the draft. I think it's also because Houston's a very international city, and we have a big Chinatown, and we have a big Chinese presence in general. There's been a very special relationship between China and my hometown basketball team, the Houston Rockets. So every team has a special jersey that's kind of their city jersey that they get to have a little bit. It's not just their colors. They get to have a little bit more creative fun with it. Our city jersey is has Chinese characters on it, and it's Chinese New Year themed, from what I understand. And it's got Chinese characters of Houston Rockets in Chinese characters, and that's basically we have a very tight relationship with that. And then I think it was 2019, before the NBA season started, you have the Houston Rockets former general manager Daryl Morey, who is that name probably doesn't mean anything to you, Marco, and 95% of the people out there, but he's a very well-renowned general manager. He's kind of a Moneyball for basketball kind of guy.
Wow.
He makes this comments that, and also another thing that you should also know is that every NBA basketball team, the Houston Rockets are owned by this billionaire guy, Tillman Fertitta, he had a TV show for a while. I'm sure that you're vaguely familiar with that name, Marco.
Hmm.
But he's like a restaurateur, but he also is a businessman, so he's got his own interests in China too. So that's kind of a layer to the story. So Daryl Morey goes on his interview and he's asked about China, and he basically says like, or no, he tweets maybe, I don't remember exactly what it was, but he was like liberation for like, I think it was like Hong Kong was what the current controversy was. It might not have been Hong Kong. It was just about maybe it was just about general democracy protests in China. Again, this was like a couple years ago. After that, Chinese government got very mad, and this was right before the season started. And every time before the season, I know I'm getting way too in the weeds about this.
No, do it, man.
But every time before the beginning of an NBA season, teams always go to China as like a exhibition game. It's like a preseason. Like obviously it didn't happen this year because everything was COVID. Like they're not traveling anywhere. But they had exhibition games in China, and those were canceled in 2019, not because of any coronavirus thing. It was canceled because the Chinese government was like, for a while they even banned any NBA games at all. And this is interesting too because the NBA was huge in China. Like I think the NBA was kind of the of American sports teams, and like what I'm talking about is NFL, MLB, NBA teams. Like they were kind of like the forerunners, and like the NBA has gained their popularity. And NBA, I think at least I know NFL has still the bigger numbers when it comes to like watching the Super Bowl and stuff, but NBA games or an NBA like its culture has become so pervasive culturally, and a lot of that has to do with kind of like the Chinese marketing and like virally, like NBA moments go viral because it's an international sport where internationally people know Kobe Bryant, and like you hear these crazy stories about like Kobe Bryant's jersey like selling out in China. Like everyone before obviously he tragically died, everyone in China loved Kobe Bryant like more than any other athlete, even like probably besides Yao Ming. There's just such a basketball culture over there, and then all of a sudden one day China was like, nope, we're gonna pull the plug just because this one guy said this one thing. And the NBA's like, this is a significant portion of their income. Like teams were bleeding because of this. Players were also kind of bleeding. Not their salaries, their current salaries were not affected, but player salaries, again, getting a little bit in the weeds, player salaries are set up as a function of team income, basically. So I don't know exactly the function that they use, but the player salary cap is set as a function of the player salary, minimum salary, and the player minimum salary is set as a function of how much money the NBA is making. So all of this kind of trickles down from like ownership to or like from the NBA as an organization to the owners to the players. So it's kind of like this trickle down effect. And everyone was kind of going crazy. I remember there was one point where James Harden, who's very close to this general manager Daryl Morey, because he played for Houston at that time, he was asked about it in an interview, and they literally he refused to answer for part of it, and then they had to they cut the mic, like that he couldn't answer anymore because they were just like, we can't have anyone saying anything, like they were all coached to say you can't say anything about this because this is an ongoing controversy, and this got into this whole scenario of like free speech in America, and like one of the most American things, and obviously football is the most American sport,
right?
But then it's still, basketball is a super American thing, and then having Chinese government kind of dictating what American basketball players, owners, executives can say. But yeah, I know another, just this is much more brief controversy. Enes Kanter, he's a Turkish basketball player. His parents, he fled Turkey to play basketball in the United States, and his parents are still in Turkey, but he hasn't seen them in 10 years because of Erdogan. He talks very negatively about the regime in Turkey.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a no-no for these regimes.
And in Turkey, you cannot. So he was on the Celtics before. I think he's on the Trailblazers now. He jumps from team to team. But those games, any game where Enes Kanter is on the field, those games are blocked in Turkey. You cannot see Enes Kanter's face in Turkey, and he's the only Turkish basketball player that I know of, that anyone knows of. I think that there's like Seti Osman, he plays for the Cavaliers. Like that's like one other Turkish player. But I know for a fact Enes Kanter, you can't see his face in Turkey because of the things he said about the Turkish government. And it's just insane to see these other, and obviously Turkey doesn't have the pull that, China does. Like, Turkish policy on NBA games is not going to affect, one, the NBA's bottom line, and two, it's not going to affect like who can speak and who can't speak. But it's just insane to see these like kind of strings being pulled by foreign governments in such a way that, is not, democratic in the way that you or I or anyone would really consider to be, American, American ideal.
This is such a big deal nowadays in a way that I can't remember it being such a big deal. Maybe even 10 years ago. And especially with China, and I want to be delicate here, right? But like I mean, there are some clear cut examples of knowing when. I mean, we know that like Chinese government interests have not been, I think, fair to the NBA and certainly to other sports where this has been affected. And China's far from the only country doing stuff like this. So, it like in Formula One, like this is such a thing that's happening too, where, like F1 have these like equality initiatives, the whole, I mean, we talked about this a little bit actually in the first episode, the whole We Race as One thing. Well, I mean, yeah, but then like where you're taking money from the regime in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East and all these places where where the laws are not, very, very social justice friendly. I'll just say that.
And FIFA, I know that and I think that they raced in Qatar, or not raced, they played in Qatar for FIFA a few years ago. That stadium was built by like effectively slave labor,
Well, the Qatar World Cup, is going to happen next year, yeah. No, well, I think what you mean is, I mean, they played in Russia not too long ago.
They played in Russia,
and now, hardly a sunshine and friendly faces regime, and the Qatar World Cup has been mired in controversy for the past 6 years, and they're gonna play there again they're gonna play there next year. That's when the World Cup is set to happen.
It reminds me of like having, and it's obviously not, I know that there's like a rule in argumentation that you can't ever mention Hitler because mentioning Hitler is like, just like that's so.
Well, that's Godwin's law, isn't it?
It's Godwin's law. That sounds familiar, but to break the law. I'm breaking the law. Look at me. But like, it reminds me of like, I think it was 1930s or like 1932 or 1928, something like that. That the Olympics were in Germany, and like Hitler was, that whole story with, I forget the athlete. Was it Jesse? I forget the name of the athlete that like,
Yeah, they made a movie about it, right?
Protested Hitler at that, like in Germany for the Olympics. But it feels like that of like, these gross civil rights violations are happening, miles away or maybe less away from, what you're seeing on TV, and like maybe even behind the camera, there's things that are happening that are just, gross kind of actions. I think it goes into this. So I think for me, it hits two chords. One, it hits this chord of like, hearing about the Haas team, you said before, it's like, it's branded itself as this all-American team. Like, I get these vibes of like kind of country boy vibes of like, all American, kind of like the hillbilly elegy type thing. And I don't know if that's the case at all. But like when I hear all American, like I know even with like some people try to lean into that and getting this like weird like conservative kind of thing, and so and like this xenophobic kind of mentality too. I think sometimes when people kind of gear things to be all American, it's kind of got this like, I don't know, this kind of edge to it of like America's first kind of mentality, whatever. And obviously if you're racing in your American team, you want America to be first, but you know what I mean?
Well, yeah. And I think you're closer than you realize, because I mean, racing, like certainly not, this is not always the case, but like, like American homegrown racing has like traditionally been a Southern thing. Yeah. Not broadly, but it's been like a Midwest Southern thing. Mm-hmm. Like North Carolina is like the place for like NASCAR, and Indiana is like the place for IndyCar, so like it is. So like when you think about like all American, like you very rarely hear that from like a person with like Californian sensibilities or New York City sensibilities. I'm not saying that those people are less American. I mean, obviously it's an argument that I hate. I think in a vacuum, without any context, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But like obviously given context, like you're right, like it does become like a xenophobic thing. But like in this case, like with this team owner, like this was just like he is a child of North Carolina. He had a lot of history in NASCAR, and he wanted to bring his expertise and American heritage to Formula One. I don't think that's a bad thing inherently. It just the international like implications of the sport and how expensive everything is. Like they are driven. Excuse my pun there. They are driven to like have to take these measures, and again, it is a big talking point right now because it like brings up questions about, is the sport too expensive? Is the sport and their owners and like the team principals and everything, are they too eager to cozy up to negative international interests? Like why, like what can be done to like fix all of these issues?
I think it's just on this like globalism versus like nativism, and like on that kind of spectrum, I think that a lot of people like, more internationally minded people kind of like tend toward this like globalism aspect. But you like, I think that's something you have to understand when you're working with people that are not your country. You kind of have to deal with and obviously we have our own, gross human rights violations within our own country.
Yeah, certainly.
But like when you're opening yourself up to an international kind of, theater, environment, competition, whatever,
right.
You are opening, like you have to deal with, these different people, and like, it's just kind of like a balance of like, okay, I see something wrong with this like all-American team. It's like, hee-haw, America's first. Like there's something wrong with that. And I also see something wrong, and what has seemed to be kind of like a globalization of the team now into this like Russian, propaganda vehicle, literally vehicle.
Yeah.
Like I do have a problem with this side where it's like all American, but I also have a problem with this other side where it's, all like this more international side, because there's like things, it's like, okay, I want it international, but not like that. And I think that once you open yourself up to international, like once you open yourself up to, the world at large, you kind of open yourself up to the problems that exist in the world at large too. We talked about basketball for a bit. Another interesting thing that I remember happening a couple of years ago, and I might get some of I'm Googling right now and hoping, this is from 2018, and I'm remembering these details from 2018, so give me a little bit of leeway. So okay. NBA gets this deal with Nike. So every single NBA jersey, there's some leeway with the shoes. Like obviously, like some athletes have Adidas, some athletes have Reebok. Most Puma is another company, but all NBA jerseys are required by the NBA to be Nike branded. So this came into effect, I guess, a couple of years ago, because I knew they used to have Adidas jerseys. A lot of teams did. But a couple years ago, they must have come up with this rule. And I'm reading this article from 2018, and I remember when this happened. And the title of this article is, NBA tells J.R. Smith to cover up his Supreme tattoo or else.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember
this.
This is a really big deal, because this was a year where, Cleveland Cavaliers were competing for a championship this year. Like this was the last, I think they had just come off of a finals loss that year. And I think that was when LeBron left. I don't know. But they were still like a significant NBA team. I think how it happened was J.R. Smith, like he had this huge Supreme tattoo. So it started with the shooting sleeves. There's a lot of players want, I don't know if you know what like shooting sleeves are, but like basically it's kind of a dumb thing, but some players wear them because they say it makes them shoot better.
Yeah. I've seen it. Yep.
It's not like the science behind it's kind of iffy, but like they have these shooting sleeves, and Supreme was a big shooting sleeve, and then like they had to get rid of it because you could no longer wear Supreme branded stuff. And so I think J.R. Smith got his tattoo in response to that because he wanted the Supreme. He got it on his leg, I think.
Yeah.
But they're saying like, you have to cover this up with some sort of like legging, Nike branded thing, because like you're breaking our agreement with Nike. And that's just so crazy that they're literally litigating these players' bodies. And, I don't know if he's from New York, but J.R. Smith played for New York for a while. Like this guy's, he's doing it for the culture,
Yeah.
and we gotta respect the Supreme culture. And I know you're a bit of a Supreme head. What's Hypebeast is the general term
No,
for it.
no.
I mean,
Let's not use that
I
word.
looked at the link you put in the chat, and it was literally like the Hypebeast meter for these different selections of clothes.
Sir, that is a falsehood.
That's a falsehood.
That is a gross thing. So this is great because like this is like the segue that I don't even know how to like. When do we stop talking about one thing and we start talking about the next one? Because I really like this because I remember this J.R. Smith story from a while ago. I do remember it. Look, I'm a Supreme guy. I really like the clothes. I like the culture. I think it's fun. I think there's a lot of like dumb misconceptions that people have about it that we might clear up a little bit later today. But and let's ignore the capitalist implications here, because that can be a really exhausting conversation that I don't think is really that relevant here.
Yeah.
I think you're right that like...
And at some point when you have those conversations, you're just having the same conversation over and over again.
Yeah. And we could have this... I mean, God, there are a lot of things we've talked about here that we could just keep having that conversation. There's just no point in doing it. I think it's weird. No, well... Okay. Like, a brand on my body... Like, would I do that? Like, probably not. Unless it was, like, my own business or something. I don't know. But...
Yeah.
But I do like the way you phrased it, because I think it's a much clearer line to draw where it's like, you know, you are... Like, you're, like, policing someone else's body. Which I think is a much clearer and more agreeable line to draw. To say, like, look, like, you shouldn't do that, and it doesn't matter. Like he should have the right to do that. God, it's so multifaceted. Like, I don't even know where to start. Like, like Nike and everything. Like, and it's funny because like Nike and Supreme are like no strangers to each other.
Yeah.
Like they collab like almost pretty much every season they collab. Like literally last week there was a Supreme Nike Dunk drop. So like I don't know.
So the rule is players can't wear anything that would interfere with their current advertisers or any potential advertisers. So another example that's kind of like a other side of the coin is Kyrie Irving. He has a Friends tattoo. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, Kyrie loves Friends. Yeah, I do know that.
And he's got a Friends one of his signature shoes. He's like a big Friends guy.
Yep, Kyrie loves Friends. Yep.
The NBA said that is not bad because that doesn't interfere with any potential advertising. Like, it's not like they're trying to advertise with, like, you know, How I Met Your Mother. So it's not competition, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, I mean, Friends is not... Yeah, I know what they're trying to... I know this is like a very finicky thing in marketing. You know, like, Friends is not... Friends as a brand, which is, you know, even though it's a TV show, like, it is a brand with the brand identity, with the brand associations. I don't know if it's being maintained as much these days, right, as it was back in its prime, right? But like Friends is not competing for the attention of Nike or any other title sponsor on a jersey, right? But you can absolutely imagine where Supreme does interfere and compete directly with Nike and maybe even the brand sponsor on a jersey.
Yeah.
So like you can definitely imagine that because Supreme sells clothing and they sell athletic clothing and they, you know, and again, like Supreme and Nike, you know, have history and things like that. Like you can absolutely imagine that.
It's interesting. So I'm looking at some of these cases here in the article, and obviously they said Kyrie Irving tattoo of Friends. That's okay. This other one, Marcin Gortat, who is no longer a player in the NBA, but he had a Jumpman logo tattooed on him, which I know a lot of people that are, you know, not basketball players have a Jumpman logo tattoo, and they said that that's totally okay because Jordan's a Nike company. This is the most interesting one because from what I understand, like Kyrie's tattoo is like, for sure Kyrie's tattoo, it's cultural. Like it's not like he's being paid by NBC to wear the Friends tattoo. Right. Same thing with J.R. Smith. Like I think it's cultural. Like it's not he's being paid by Supreme. That I know of. But this is an interesting case of, in 2001, Rasheed Wallace, who was a player on the Detroit Pistons. He's a championship player, a fantastic player. I think he was a very good defender. I wasn't watching basketball when I was 2 years old, but that's just, you know, what I know culturally. Right. He was told, so he was approached by an unnamed candy company. It never came out what candy company it was. Like, we don't know if it's like Tootsie Roll or like Hershey's or whatever. Like, who knows? He was approached by an unnamed candy company to wear a temporary tattoo of the candy logo during games to give the company exposure. Like he was explicitly asked by the company, like, put this on your shoulder, wear it during the game, like, hope you pray you don't sweat it off, I guess. And it's just, I think it's hilarious that, like, these are all other cases of like inadvertent brand advertising, but this case is of a player actually being approached and saying, hey, can you wear this temporary tattoo, which in and of itself is just hilarious. And I think it's interesting. It says something about advertising that everyone's seen the Friends logo, everyone's seen the Nike logo, everyone's seen the Adidas logo, everyone's seen the Supreme logo, or a lot of people have at least. Like, why is it's interesting, it's just such a big issue of like, why is it necessary that they see it again? Like, what is it about this, like, and I know it's all about like, permeating the market and just repetitive like exposure of your brand to get people to associate it with athletes or whatever. But it's just so crazy that it's like, no, like we have set rules. You have to wear our brand, and our brand has to be visible for this many minutes on this player's body. And it's just so interesting that psychology is so down to a science, Again,
like I can absolutely see an argument where primary basketball sponsors like Nike or even just the people looking out for the NBA's sponsorship interests don't want to have all of that clutter, right, of streetwear and sneakerheads and sports fashion and things like that. Like, it's kind of vague, but they're all kind of associated with each other, I think.
And I think that they see a future, like, I think that they see a future market there of like, I don't think that there's any, like, the athletes are obviously making money off owning or off wearing specific streetwear brands. NBA is not currently seeing that money, but I think that maybe they're seeing some sort of potential, because I really do think that's interesting that like they were like, it cannot interfere with our current advertisers or any future advertising interest that we can make revenue off of. So I'm curious if they're thinking like, well, we don't currently have a deal with Supreme, but maybe we could in the future, but that would be ruined. Like, we can't have a deal with, if all of our players are wearing Supreme on the court anyway, then they're not going to do a deal with us. So maybe there's seeing a potential there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, Supreme is just so culturally relevant that it's just part of the culture, and it's definitely not a culture that I'm necessarily a part of. I'm not the hype beast of the wrong fit crew.
Well, I think, and I'm not either. Let's not say things.
When I hear about Supreme, like I just like that is Supreme equals hype beast to me. And I know you own a lot of Supreme, but I know you maybe don't have the same mentality of some of these other hype beasts. But to me, hype beast is just so.
Like, what is a hype beast?
That's a good question.
I think
that
is a good question. I mean, I think people ask that every day. I think like a hype beast is like a guy that is like decked out from head to toe with like garish, expensive clothing just for the sake of it. Like you often see like Louis Vuitton and like Bape and and Supreme and like lots of Nike and stuff like that. And I tend to think a person like that doesn't like appreciate maybe like the intricacies of like Supreme's story and its history, or even like some of these other like high-end fashion brands. I think they're not concerned with that. I think they're literally just concerned with the hype, right? Like, oh, like people are hyped about this release or that release and like this piece of clothing and that piece of clothing, like, and I'm going to wear it just because of the hype. And I think sometimes I think it's fun to get swept up in the hype in the same way you'll get swept up in like movie hype, video game hype. I think that's just a different kind of thing. But like these guys make it their whole identity, which, I mean, good for them. Live your life, live your truth. Like, that's not the way I approach it. I tend to approach it more from like, if you look at like Supreme's history, it's like really, I think it's really interesting. Like, you look at like their collabs that they work with, some of them are really creative and like very under the radar. Like, the things like they're the kind of things that don't really interest the hype beasts. The hype beasts tend to go for, like, we've all seen them, like the solid color, box logo, crew neck sweaters, hoodies and stuff like that like aren't that creative.
No.
But like Supreme has like so many things in their catalog that are very creative, very interesting, quite garish sometimes, a little gaudy, but I think that's just part of the culture, like part of like the streetwear, like skater head culture from New York from the 90s. I think, I don't want to say like you had to have been there, which I wasn't there, but like I think that's kind of like what they're going for. So yeah, like I think that's a misconception that people, and that's the doorbell. I think it's a misconception that people have Like for one thing, like I know that there are people that think that Supreme only make the box logo stuff.
Yeah,
Not true.
We see it all. That's the
yeah,
layman.
right. But like not true.
I know. Yeah,
I think people think that the box logo or any of their clothing or most of it like automatically comes with like a $4,000 price tag. Not true either. In fact, my God, I think that's my dad. Okay, hold on.
Yeah, you're good.
All right, I'm back. That'll be fun for the show, I think. That I have to like, get up and answer the door. Again, like I think people think that like it all costs that much. Again, not true. In fact, these days it is easier than ever to get like really cool, interesting clothing, high quality, by the way, for the retail prices, right? Which are expensive. If you are not used to paying like $40 for a t-shirt, then you will think it's expensive. And I don't blame you for that, right? Most of my t-shirts don't cost that much.
Yeah. When you're just lounging around a house, you can get away with like a $5 t-shirt,
Right. I think you can get away with $5 anything most of the time, right? Yeah. But like for $40, like you are paying for, like, let's just face it, like you're paying for a brand image, right? If it's the image you want to convey. And again, like never talked about is like the quality of the pieces too, like where Supreme sources them from. Like they are some of like my Supreme clothing is the highest quality clothing I own for like very comparable prices too. So like again, like people think it's like all Gildan stuff. Again, not true either. So I'm fine with the misconceptions. I don't care what people think about me when I wear clothing like that. But I do try to like clear those up because people have like such a warped view, and I blame the Hypebeasts that have like no brains at all, and that they just like their whole ethos is the hype. I blame them for propagating that because I actually think that like the Supreme model, like the Supreme business model, is informing like other like lesser known but like sustainable, interesting fashion brands that are like limiting the amount of production that they make in a sustainable way and dropping releases weekly. Like this is hardly the thing that's a thing that Supreme is the only one doing. Like that's, like they're hardly the only ones doing that, and yet like this brand is the one that gets all the hate and criticism. I just wanted to like clear up those misconceptions.
Yeah. They're building a culture. Yeah. Like that's what, like they're building a Supreme culture. Like that's a thing like that I understand now, like that's like a pervasive wraparound kind of culture. And I think that's how, I think it's, kind of circling back to what we're talking about with J.R. Smith. Like I think that's why it was such a big thing for him to have that tattooed on his leg or to have a shooting sleeve or whatever. It's just because it is such a big cultural like wraparound, like this is who I am kind of, that's a reason why he, in the same way that, the Jordan logo is like, that says success, that says, exactly. Iconic, whatever. It's not even about Michael Jordan anymore. It's about success. Like they have football jerseys are branded with the Jordan logo.
I know.
And people have tattooed. And I think it's the same. You can say the same thing in a different way, obviously, with Supreme as being like, this says quality. This says a story about like culture and these different places and stuff like that,
And I swear that like people just turn their brains off when I'm sorry, I'm going hard on this because like this is just the same thing with another brand. Like I'm sorry, like I have been a fan of Supreme for about 3 years now, and like it's just fun. It's fun to be a fan of this brand because they come out with so many like eclectic and eccentric designs of their clothing. Like they're really fun
customers,
fun collaborations, like interesting accessories. Like it's fun to be a fan of this brand, and like
and I know I like collaborations. Collaborations are just fun, It's an interesting like I got my Arizona green tea Adidas sneakers. It's just fun to say like, oh yeah, like people will like you'll be walking around the street and people will look at your sneakers and like, oh that's so cool. Like I love Arizona, like stuff like that.
Like I have like the NASA Vans too. Like NASA didn't need to collab with Vans. Like Vans could have done like any generic space themed like thing, but because it has like the official NASA cosign, like that's great. Like it's cool, fun. Like it. And again, like I think people understand this. They have an innate understanding of it, but when it comes to Supreme, like they just don't understand. Like they suddenly like don't know about any of this stuff. It's like, come on, like this is just the same thing.